So this begins our unit on elections. We're going to be talking about the election up into and then a little bit after the election itself. We'll begin this week with some information about the media and the way that the media influences our perception of politics, especially around an election. Then, starting next week, we'll look at some of the major issues at play in this year's election, both locally and at the presidential level. Then we'll examine how voting works, both the Electoral College and then at the local level, how our local system works. Finally, after the election, we'll do an analysis of how we think it went and break down the voting patterns that we saw across the city and how it affects the rest of the country. So to begin, we look at the source of our information. Of course, today there are countless sources of information, most of them based on the internet, the fact that we can access the internet on a machine that sits in our pockets. Now, it wasn't always this way. Even I am old enough to remember a time before cell phones, particularly before smartphones, and before things like Instagram or Snapchat or Vine or even kind of the modern iteration of YouTube existed. Now, I'm not even that old, too, depending on how you look at it. So we're going to be examining how even where you get your information influences the way that you see the world and the way that you engage with politics and political news. Our first stop is going to be, what is media? How does media influence our lives? And finally, how does media influence our politics? The overarching question of this entire unit, all the way through the election, will be, to what extent are US elections a democratic process? The United States prides itself on being a democracy, on being one of the first in the current modern form of democracy. However, as we will discover, it's a little more complicated than say that it is a direct democratic representation of the interests of the people. So, what exactly is the democratic process? As we examine the ways that democracy plays out and the process through which we go to elect leaders and then to influence their decisions for us, we'll be examining a couple of things. The vocab for today, when we talk about the media, comes in three forms. Bias, which is unfairly favoring one side over another. Context, which is the larger picture or surrounding circumstances. Finally, manipulation, changing something slightly to control how it is perceived. This is making minor changes to have major effects. When we examine what exactly media can be, we often think of the media in the way that the president argues about it, right? He often talks that the media is unfair. But in general, media means a lot of things. It is a plural form of the term medium, which we think of as small, medium, and large. But medium can also be any form through which communication is done. So that could be artistic expression, that could be through conveying information. When we talk about medium, sometimes we hear people say, "Oh, you're an artist? What medium do you work in?" "Oh, I paint, I draw, I write." The medium is the expression, or again, the form of communicating an idea, a thought, or an emotion. Why does the media matter? So in our Constitution, or more accurately in the Bill of Rights, which is technically the first amendments to the Constitution, although done at the same time, are included the protections for freedom of speech and specifically freedom of the press. The Founding Fathers saw the press, even as it existed then, which is simply, printed newspapers and pamphlets, as so important it must be protected in the very first of all the amendments. Why do you think it is that they thought it was so important to value the press and freedom of speech, particularly at that time when a lot of countries had kings? Furthermore, why do you think the media gets so much criticism from our current president? Of course, he's not the first president to criticize the media or claim unfair treatment. However, he does so in such a way that he claims illegitimacy of the press.